boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us today the National Operations Director for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. He's also the host of syndicated show Liberty Roundtable, and he hosts the Who Owns the Media Makes the Rules presentations. I want to introduce to you today Sam Bushman. Sam, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, sir. Thanks for having me.
I saw your Who Owns the Media Makes the Rules presentation, and really brilliant observations that you've pointed out. But we're here mainly today to talk about your role with the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. Why don't you go ahead and just lay down for us what exactly is that organization and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, really quick on the He Who Owns the Media Makes the Rules presentation. I was giving that presentation for years before Trump and others started to take on the media like they have. And so it's kind of interesting. I was a pioneer in that effort. And then I evolved that into a speech called The New Media is Taking Center Stage, which really highlights shows like yours, promoting the great work you guys are all doing and how appreciative we, the people, are for your work in the new media. So that's just a little quick summary on that. And on my background, I've been a host of Liberty Roundtable Live for 25 years, syndicated talk show host. I also do a radio program or a TV program now called the Sheriff Mack Show with Richard Mack on Brady on TV every Tuesday morning. So that's kind of a summary of my history in the media. When it comes to the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is a organization which really is an organization of Americans, we the people. And so we become members of this organization, and the money, the funding that we get from the memberships does several things. One, it acts as a clearinghouse to help provide information as you in your local county vet your sheriff's candidates. As somebody's running for sheriff, how do you vet them? How do you ask the right questions to make sure that you get a constitutional sheriff? How do you get a sheriff that understands and will keep his oath of office? Well, we provide all kinds of clearinghouse materials to help that happen, from candidate questionnaires to a constitutional resolution that we put together with several hundred sheriffs and constitutional attorneys and constitutional scholars, etc. So that is available. We have several books that Sheriff Richard Mack has written: The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, From My Cold Dead Fingers, The Proper Role of Law Enforcement, Are You a David, just to name a few. And so we act as a clearinghouse of information for the people, number one. Number two, I mentioned that we, the people, will back our sheriffs. And so we want to help find and elect constitutional sheriffs, but we also want them to know that we have their back, though. We're not anti-police by any means, although we agree the bad apples need to be relieved of duty. But the good, honest police officers and sheriffs, you know what? We want to support them. There shouldn't be a rift or a divide between the people and those who we've elected to serve us, the sheriffs. There should be synergism. There should be support. And so not only are we a clearinghouse for information, but we also provide training, as our president is Sheriff Richard Mack. He beat Bill Clinton at the Supreme Court over the Brady bill. And so we train constitutional sheriffs all across the country as well. And we train public officials about their oath of office, about the Constitution. And we get into the weeds. We get into the details with questions and answers and role plays and everything. And the goal is to help them understand in the real world, how do you keep your oath of office in this modern day with out of control government and really difficulty lying at every side? How do you keep your oath? How do you understand your responsibilities? How do you become a protector of the people? How do you become a peace officer? How do you protect, serve, and defend? And how do you do all that in the modern face of all kinds of checks and balance violations by the federal government, by the governors? How do you do all that? And so we provide a clearinghouse of information for the people and then training for public officials. We go around the country and conduct this training. So our whole goal is to help the people back their sheriffs and public officials to keep their oaths of office. That's what the whole organization is about.
This training for the sheriff's offices, is this something solicited by the sheriff's office themselves, or is this something you get the states to kind of implement? What's the direction this come from?
So it can come from any direction. In every county, it's different. There's about 3,000 counties, 3,081 counties in the United States. So there's a lot of sheriffs. And then there's sheriff's departments in every state and county. There's police departments as well. So oftentimes sheriffs ask for the training. Other times citizens ask their sheriffs, hey, Are you willing to take this training? And so it can come from any direction. But what we do is we do work with the states and we do work with the county sheriff, and we can provide what's called continuing education, or CE credit, for police officers, just like any profession that has licensing that goes along with it.
Right.
There is continuing educational training. And so we can provide that training and get the police officers credit. So a lot of police officers, a lot of sheriff's deputies that come to our training, at first they come and they're like, I don't even know what this is about. I just need credit, But then when they get there and they shake hands and they look people in the eye and they really get constitutional training, they leave going, wow, I'm sure glad I attended this. This is amazing. And so the request for training can come from a lot of different places. Sometimes it comes from a county commission saying, hey, let's get our sheriffs trained. Sometimes it comes from the people. Sometimes it comes from the sheriff himself. Sometimes it comes from state legislative people and bodies and things. So wherever it comes from, the point is we put together legitimate constitutional training that is CE approved. That's our goal, working with the sheriff. The sheriff has to sponsor it for the CE credits to be valid. But we do work with all entities there, and we provide a unique form of training. It's de-escalation training. It's all kinds of things, right?
This isn't just constitutional discussion. This is how do you do your job effectively as a police officer and yet maintain that Constitution, right?
Yes, but it reminds me of a thread of constitutionality through everything we teach. For example, the de-escalation training. There's tactics that you can use to de-escalate situations. That may not be specifically a constitutional discussion, except for, the Constitution realizes that the public officials that serve us, they realize they get their authority from our consent, we the people. In other words,
Right.
they know they work for the people. And so it's constitutional by nature to de-escalate and to be a peace officer and to keep your oath of office and to make sure that people get due process. And so all these constitutional principles are in that de-escalation education.
Okay, so it's all tied together as a philosophy of how you do your police work
Absolutely.
in
Yes,
line
sir.
with the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
All right, so if I'm a citizen then and I'm in a county where, say, I'm questionable about how constitutional the sheriff is or the department or how things are going, do I go to you all for help or do I start a campaign here? Where would I begin?
It's always good to go to us for guidance and help and support materials. As I mentioned, we're a clearinghouse of information. So if you go to the CSPOA.org and become a member, then you get all kinds of support materials to help you. For example, there's a weekly webinar that Sheriff Mack does. It's called The Posse, where you can literally ask Sheriff Mack questions and have context and presentations on different topics, giving you guidance. We can send you materials upon request. For example, the candidate questionnaire that I mentioned, etc. So getting a background so that you're educated first is always great. And then we always want you to start slow. Remember, your sheriff may not be a constitutional sheriff, but he may be a great guy, maybe a great gal, maybe a great person. But oftentimes in our lives, because of government, school, and everything else, we don't get educated in the Constitution. Sheriff Mack, at one point, he says he was a jerk cop because he just didn't
Right.
understand. And eventually he had his awakening and his education followed. But that's the same for all of us. And so we want to think about, as we approach our sheriffs or any public officials for that matter, we want to think about it of how to win friends and influence people idea. We don't want to just go in and say, hey, are you constitutional? If not, you're a thug. We want to go about it and say, first off, does your sheriff know
Right.
your name? And do you know
Right.
your sheriff's name? And it starts out by just making friends. It starts out just by, you know what, Sheriff, my name is Sam Bushman, and I'm here to support you. You know what? We're grateful for constitutional sheriffs. And, at first he'll just be nice to you. But as you gain friendship and gain kind of an element of trust, then you can start to slowly but surely say, Sheriff, there's a constitutional training that I'd really like you to learn about. It's from a man by the name of Sheriff Richard Mack. Have you heard of him? And now you can kind of make this dialogue happen. And so I guess what I'm kind of saying is walk before you run, understand and give your local officials the benefit of the doubt, even if they're not constitutional now. They may be open to working on that very thing. They may be open to training, open to some books that you can provide from the CSPOA, open to discussions, open to meeting with the people. And that's what we want to kind of work on one step at a time. If we find over time that sheriff will not become constitutional or is not, and shows no interest, then it's time for us to seek for another candidate to replace them. But I'd be very patient with your public officials, because you know what? Every one of us had our kind of come to Jesus moment when it comes to understanding the Constitution and understanding the proper role of limited government and such. So we need to give them a chance as well.
I imagine for many who would be listening to this conversation, they'd be warring in their heads this tension between maintaining order, fighting crime, and they would put this in their mindset versus constitutionality. Like there might be a conflict. Are you letting the criminals get away if you're too soft? Uh, or are you becoming tyrannical if you're too harsh? I mean, have you had a lot of these questions in these discussions, and how do you approach those?
Absolutely. And the first answer to the question is very unique, because that highlights the difference between a county sheriff and a police chief. A police chief is appointed by the city council, the mayor, the city commissioner or city manager. Oftentimes, these people appoint a police chief. Who do they answer to? Who do they get their paycheck from? And that is the people that appointed them.
Right.
On the other hand, a county sheriff is elected by we the people, and he serves at the pleasure of we the people. And if we don't like him, we can remove him, or her for that matter. And so
That's
the
right.
point about it is that decreases a lot of the tension to have county sheriffs rather than appointed police chiefs. And that's what part of the training we give to understand. At first, it seems like, hey, there's not much difference in the two. So what? Well, it matters, because it matters who they look to for guidance. It matters who they have respect for. It matters whose marching orders, if you will, they take, we the people's or those who elected them. A bureaucrat, an appointed position, has a different accountability, is the point. So all I'm saying to you is that county sheriffs decrease tension because they answer to the people that elected them, as opposed to some bureaucracy. The second question is, when you're a constitutional sheriff, it doesn't mean you're hard or soft. What it means is that you understand that your oath of office requires that you insist on the checks and balances that made America great, vertically and horizontally. So when I say vertically and horizontally, I'm talking about the three branches of government, the legislative and the judicial, for example. The sheriff falls into the executive, right? And then the other way, whereas the county and the state and the federal government, they all have checks. And so being a constitutional sheriff has a lot more to do with checks and balances, a whole lot more to do with keeping your oath of office, which means, look, I don't know if you're guilty or not, sir, but I'm going to guarantee you are going to get due process while I'm sitting here. That's my job. That's my duty. I'm going to make sure that you get due process. I'm going to make sure that, things are obeyed in terms of a speedy trial for you. I'm going to make sure that, okay. And so it's all down the line of these fundamental principles that we teach that are the key. And some deliver it hard, some deliver it soft, just like any humans will be. But the principles are what we point to. And I think that a constitutional sheriff decreases tons of tension between citizens and cops, because they're honorable. They respect due process. They don't just get angry and, you know what, because you're a jerk, I'm going to throw you in the slammer. No, wait a minute. You can be a jerk all you want to, but I'm going to follow the rules about how I'm going to treat you. If I'm the sheriff, I'm going to be kind to you and respectful. Even if you're not kind to me, my job requires that I treat you decently and appropriately, and that I respect your God-given inalienable rights. And for me to respect those, I have to know what they are, and so on. And so I guess what I'm saying is the tension decreases when you have a county sheriff as opposed to an elected official. As opposed to an appointed official. And when the checks and balances and when the constitutionality principles are obeyed, then instant respect replaces that questioning and that tension and that concern. It goes away instantly when I know, hey, sheriff doesn't have to like me, but he will protect my rights. He's a good man. She's a good woman. That goes a long way towards building trust between we the people and those who serve us.
Do you believe there's a conflict with many abusive sheriffs who are abusive of their authority and positions that needs correcting? Is there a huge misunderstanding right now and how it should be applied?
I think there's a misunderstanding about wanting to defund the police. Yes. I think the idea to defund the police is crazy. And I think those who have started down that road instantly regret it and want to change course quickly. those who also oftentimes call for defunding of the police. They're the ones that have armed protection around them, bureaucrats and elitists and actors and actresses and whatever, movie stars and rappers. They're the ones that are like, hey, disarm everybody else. We don't care, because they have their own protection, right? But for most of us, I think that most of the sheriffs mean to do a good job. The bigger the place, oftentimes the bigger the jerks the cops are, because they have so much difficulty. There's been a crisis between the people and those who are supposed to protect them. And I think we can go a long way by getting to know our sheriffs and letting our sheriffs know us. But yes, there are sheriffs that are out of control, that are abusing their power, and we need to literally rein them in and replace them. Same with police chiefs. We need to not tolerate that. Defunding the police, in my opinion, goes way too far. But realizing that there are bad eggs in the basket, there are, bad apples in the barrel, there's no question there are, and they need to be removed. It's those who are in it for power, in it for authority, in it for control. They need to be gone yesterday. Because remember, to protect and serve, to defend, okay, that's what a sheriff and that's what policing is about when done right.
Yeah, defunding police, I'm definitely not on board with that whatsoever. As you said, the people who don't need police protection seem to be the loudest proponents of
they're crazy.
Police. Yeah, but I guess the other side of their intellectual argument is to take those funds and to put it into social programs to have a less need for police. Do you think that's a viable option at all?
I think the more training we give police, like constitutional training, the de-escalation training that I mentioned, etc. I think that if police know how to treat the citizenry with respect, I think they'll get respect back. I think it's when the police act like, hey, I'm in charge here. You shut down, you shut up, you sit down, you do whatever I do. Hey, sir, as if I'm in charge and I'm just this. People don't like that. If I'm a police officer and I'm a peace officer and I respect your rights and I realize you have God-given rights and I realize that I work for you and I realize that I have a job to do, but at the same time I can be a decent person and treat you as an equal in doing so, I think that's going to take us way further along the spectrum towards solutions and accountability and trust than I do putting people in all kinds of psychobabble programs. Now, do I think there are things that can decrease the problems in the first place before we ever get to that? Yes. I think fathers in the home are key.
There you go.
I think there are a lot of solutions, and I'm not saying that counseling or giving people a second chance, I'm not saying those things don't apply. But I'm saying if we think we can just take the cops out of it and counsel with counselors or whatever, these psychological people, our way out of this, I think we're wrong, and I think we're fooling ourselves.
Yeah, we are fooling ourselves. But I haven't been a police officer, but I've been a soldier in scenarios very similar. And when you establish a rapport with the people you're among, that you have the gun, they don't, and you're watching them, sort of thing. If you're not on good terms with them, it just goes bad. Period. It doesn't matter what.
And by the way, it always will.
Yeah, but when you establish that rapport with them, and they respect you and you respect them, things go so much better. And that's definitely. I don't know if that element's missing in some police departments.
It's missing in most.
Yeah, because if they establish respect, even with people that are hiding from the police, if there's that element of respect, that creates, to me, not only more efficiency and less need to put the screws down, but you also get information better that way too in dealing with crime.
Yeah, your point's well taken. Think if you're the sheriff and I'm the public. If you anger me and I'm thinking you're a jerk, then I'm not likely to help you. I'm just like, whatever, leave me alone. I don't want you near me.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you develop a relationship with me, now you can use my eyes and my ears to help you. And that's what I think is really missing in our society today. Who are the bad apples? We need to identify them and kind of know who they are and keep an eye out for them. But we also need to know who our friends are. And if I know my sheriff's name and he knows my name and he knows I'm a good guy and I've been encouraging him, and then he hears something negative about me, instead of deciding to kick my door in with a battering ram, he can call Sam up and say, Sam, let's go to McDonald's and talk. Okay. And that's the difference we're talking about.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
I mean, this is a good approach, I believe, in working with sheriffs. I mean, I'm just curious, does any of this have an application into urban areas where you don't have the sheriffs? You have the appointed police officers who are beholden to the person appointing them, and they're going to listen to them rather than, an electorate. Does any of this, have you crossed over into that
Yeah,
realm
we have.
with
We do
these
a lot of
with these
training for police
programs?
departments and everything else that have appointed people. Police chiefs come to our training and everything else. Remember, there's several elements to the training. One is this understanding about a police chief versus a sheriff. It's a point of understanding, right? But we can take anybody and help them understand how important the founders believed due process to be. How important it is to appeal to the checks and balances. It's a protection to the sheriff or to even a police chief. They're the executive maybe on the day-to-day beat, but you know what? They've got a city council or a county commission in the legislative branch to deal with. They've got a DA to deal with in the judicial branch, kind of a thing. Legislative and judicial, teaching them about these checks and balances acts as a protection to the sheriff because they can get buy-in and support from other branches of government. On the federal government level to the local government, we use a term called coordination. You know what? The sheriffs that do the right constitutionally say, federal government, I only want you to come into my county if you notify me first. It's going to save lives and protect people because I'm not going to have these, goons running around that I'm not aware of here. I might think they're the bad guys. But if you coordinate with me, we can sit down and talk. And if you have all your papers in order, if you're willing to respect due process and respect the checks and balances, if you're willing to understand and respect that I'm the leader in this county, but we can work together, hey, we can do business. And so that's kind of an understanding that I think we can teach everyone to believe in. When you learn about liberty, and you hear the stories of the founding fathers, and when you hear about hero sheriffs that are standing up today with issues that you're wrestling with, pretty soon it leaves the theory discussion of training and turns into a reality discussion of training. You know what to do in situations. You know what's been done before you and worked. You know who the heroes are. And that starts to touch your heart and your mind in very unique ways. Where you catch the spirit of liberty. And that's what we're looking for. And that can happen whether you're appointed or not, right?
Right. How does that really work, though? I mean, man, there's no end to the opinion as far as like what a sheriff can do, what the federal government can do, because it's presented like they butt heads all the time, or don't want to work together. Can the federal government override the sheriff in some cases? Can the sheriff override the federal government in some cases? How does that really work?
Yes. And so I can't give you how it works in a simple phrase answer because the issues are very wide, very complicated. For example, Congress has been given power over money. So if there's money laundering in your county that crosses borders of states, hey, it's going to be pretty hard to keep the federal government out of that discussion, right?
Right.
So it all depends on the circumstances, but each have what are called jurisdictional authorities. And the federal government does not have carte blanche authority to do anything they want anywhere all the time. And the battle between Sheriff Richard Mack and former President Bill Clinton really typifies the point. Bill Clinton said, we're going to create the Brady bill, gun control bill all across the country. And Sheriff Mack was a county sheriff in Graham County, Arizona at the time and said, no, you're not in my county. We believe in guns in our county. You're not going to. And Bill Clinton said, Sheriff, shut up, sit down, or I'm going to arrest you. And Sheriff Mack said, no, you're not. And they went to the Supreme Court and Sheriff Mack won. And Bill Clinton lost. And it created the greatest 10th Amendment decision ever rendered in the United States of America today. Basically, the judge, Antonin Scalia, wrote the authority opinion on that, the majority opinion, which said this. Richard Mack was forced to choose between his oath of office and obeying Bill Clinton. That's an undoable reality. So
Right.
there are dual sovereignties in this country. The states have broad authority. The federal government has very narrow and defined authority. And the Constitution lays out what is authorized to the federal government. And then everything else is left to the states and to the people respectively, thus the 10th Amendment. Well, I bring this up because in this court case, literally the judge read Bill Clinton the Riot Act by saying, look, the states do not have any obligation to carry out your unfunded or otherwise mandates where there's no jurisdiction. These dual sovereignties between the state and the federal government prevent that. And so not only does the sheriff not have to do what you say, but the state officials don't have to do what you say, President Clinton. And so it was a really detailed guidance about what is to happen jurisdictionally. And the reason I say it like that is because, yes, there are unique situations, but as a whole, the federal government has no authority over the states. Remember, the tail doesn't wag the dog. The states created the federal government, not the other way around. And
Right.
so, you know what? We can't have the tail wag the dog here. And so most things are left to the states and to the counties respectively. The federal government has some jurisdictional involvement as well. If there was a post office issue for some, it might be a federal issue. And then what an honest constitutional sheriff will do is say, hey, federal government, we want to have an open working relationship. We want to coordinate on this thing. So I'm going to work with you. You can come into my jurisdiction. Just keep me apprised of what's happening. I'll make sure you have all your paperwork in order. That's my duty, to stand between you and the people for protection of the people. But I want to work with you. And if you have your paperwork in order, and if you're on a just cause, if you are carrying out something that constitutionally you have been delegated by the people, then I'm here to help. And so there are ways to work together, and the relationship does not need to be adversarial, and it's not vague and just confusing where it's just all opinion. There's court cases, there's jurisdictional realities that highlight the authority of the sheriff here. And most of the government officials know what that really is. But when they can walk over a sheriff, if a sheriff doesn't live up to his station, then we have trouble. It's when the sheriffs live up to their station and just put a stop to it that we don't have that problem. Sheriff Brad Rogers, he was in Elkhart County, Indiana, and an Amish guy was getting beat up by the, was it the FDA, I think? And basically what happened was they were bugging him, and all of a sudden he called his sheriff and said, look, they're bugging me and they're trying to shut down my farm. And the sheriff got involved and said, are you ready to take this to the bank, citizen? And the citizen said, absolutely. And so Sheriff Brad Rogers, he's a former sheriff now he's a county commissioner because term limits ended on his sheriffship, if you will. But anyway, he basically stood in the gap and told the FDA to get out of his county, and they've never come back.
Wow.
So there are answers. There are real live solutions that are happening, and there are men and women who are making these realities happen, and they speak at our forums and in our trainings. And so Brad Rogers goes to our trainings and tells all these law enforcement people about his experience, and he shows them the letter that he wrote the FDA, and he explains what the FDA tried to do to him. They tried to threaten him too, and he said, no, I don't think so, just like Richard Mack did. And so we have all kinds of examples of real live men and women standing up. That's what I mean by taking this out of the theory training idea into the reality training idea. These are people that have said and done it, not people that dream about it.
So how does this work then, say, with state versus sheriff? Because this is a different, this isn't state versus the federal. This is the sheriff, who I assume is beholden to the state to some degree.
To some degree,
For
yes.
his sheriff, yeah.
Remember,
So
the sheriffs were created before the states were. There were sheriffs around before we even had states, for that matter. So
yes.
it is a little bit fuzzy between the state and the sheriff, and I don't really want to answer the question 100% because every state's different. But I will give you an example to make the point. There was a sheriff in Liberty County, Florida. Long story short, his deputy arrested somebody over a gun issue. The sheriff found out about it and released the citizen and said, we're not going to be prosecuting Second Amendment issues. We're not doing it. Well, then the state found out. The governor literally yanked the sheriff out of office, put him on hiatus. The sheriff got mad. They went to court, and eventually the sheriff won and the governor lost. We called it, in our article that we wrote about it several years ago, thank heavens there was liberty in Liberty County. So that just because the state has an involvement
Right.
there's a check and balance here. And we can't think the state's always in charge of the sheriff, and we can't think the sheriff's always in charge of the state. It all depends on what's involved. The Second Amendment in this case was involved. There are a lot of
That was the
state
thing that
matters,
came to my
though.
mind
Really
because in
quick, there are a
Virginia,
lot of state matters where the state constitution takes precedence, right?
because I was thinking in Virginia recently with the Virginia wanting to go after the sheriffs who refused to carry out some of the things they wanted to do with the gun control. And so I was wondering if that's a different realm with the state versus federal government, because
It is because you
states
have a
have a
state
different kind of
constitution
sovereignty. Yeah.
involved, but the sheriffs in Virginia are winning now. The state
Well,
hasn't gone
yes.
after them or taken them down or anything.
Right. And that's good. I'm glad they stood that ground. But I mean, I was just curious about the legal battlefield in regards to, it's one thing to be the federal government, but the state is kind of, like you said, they created the federal government. States did.
Yes,
So that there's this strange paradigm that don't really exist in any other country to speak of,
that's
where
right.
the federal government's created by powers that already existed and governed itself. So it's a different,
But to
paradigm
answer
for
your
these sheriffs
question this
operating
way,
in.
certainly the states have broader authority than the federal government does by far.
Right. Because states have policing powers that the federal government's not supposed to have. But sometimes the federal government makes policing legislation.
That's right.
uh, so can the federal government go after a sheriff for a federal legislation that there's a disagreement about, or I mean, it seems like just very complicated landscape.
It is a complicated landscape, and that's why the CSPOA has some constitutional sheriffs um, who are backed by constitutional attorneys to kind of ferret through that. Some of it, as you mentioned, is case by case scenario. Some of
Yes.
it, oftentimes, as you know, in law that's never been tested, you don't know the answer because it's never been tested. For example, can you vaccinate all these businesses? Joe said yes. The reality is the courts say no, right? So some of
Right.
this is as new issues come up, some of it has never been tested in law, and we may not know the answers. In each state, some of it may be different. In every state constitution is different, and so it's fairly nuanced to your point, and that's why we provide support for sheriffs.
The constitutionality of issues is always coming up. I mean, like recently with vax mandates, or passports, or wearing a mask, has been very prominent news with if it's constitutional or not, uh, among other things. I mean, sheriffs must be pulling their hair out trying to figure out how to walk the line on this one.
Yes, in fact, some sheriffs are providing leadership guidance for other sheriffs. So in Washington State, there's a sitting sheriff now by the name of Bob Songer. Constitutional Sheriff Bob Songer wrote a letter to his governor and to the Attorney General of the United States and said, listen, if you expect vaccinations, if you expect masks, we're not going to be participating and backing you in these things in our county. That's not happening. We will look at due process for our citizens. And anyway, it was a great, incredible letter that he wrote. And then he sent it out to all these public officials, letting them know where he stood constitutionally. And then I mentioned the Sheriff Richard Mack show that we do on TV, simulcast on my radio show. It's Brady on TV. I bring that up, though, because we shared that letter on the air, and then Bob Songer makes that letter available to any sheriff in the country that needs that draft as a boilerplate or a template to use in their own situations. So that's what I mean by we're a clearinghouse of information as well.
Working with the CSPOA is a good sound footing, I suppose, to deal with these issues as they come up, because they are, each scenario being different.
I think so, yes, for sure. Some stuff is pretty boilerplate and easy. Very unique cases are sometimes difficult to navigate, for sure.
Yeah, it's just I always have my eye open and ear to the ground for just political leverage moves that just irritate me to no end. To bypass Constitution, to bypass rules or establish precedent, to force things in, and it's like there despite our checks and balances, it still gets pushed in sometimes. Do you really think this approach through sheriffs is another means of stemming that?
Yeah, Sheriff Mack wrote a book called The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope. And so I think the sheriff, understanding his constitutional responsibilities, his willingness to keep his oaths or his oath of office, I think those are critical. But I think it's even more critical that we back our sheriff. So let me give you an example. If Bob Songer puts everybody on notice that this is where his stance is, as I mentioned, if people don't believe he has any backing, then it's the sheriff. And yes, he has authority because he's elected, but how much authority does he really have standing alone? On the
Right.
other hand, if he comes back and says, yeah, the district attorney in my county agrees with me, my county commission agrees with me, and I have 10,000 citizens that agree with me as well, we're not doing this in our county, gentlemen. Do you see how that becomes a different story? And that's why we really believe that the county sheriff, America's Last Hope, is one of the keys. But it all depends on how much the CSPOA members and otherwise back our county sheriffs, though. Any public official that goes out on a limb for us needs to be supported by their constituents or they're in trouble. And so that's why we really teach that it's up to we the people to back our constitutional sheriff. If he's going to make a stand, he's got to know we've got his back.
Is this model applicable to urban areas? I mean, again, because the sheriffs primarily are in rural locations
Yes,
or
it,
small, bigger towns,
it's
but still, the
applicable.
city itself is not run by sheriffs. The police officers are usually appointed, as you said, beholden to somebody else. And that's generally, for example, things like vax mandates, mask, or gun control usually tends to be in big urban areas where it gains traction. It, constitution or not is not even considered. Is there some, and that's where the big population is. That's where the electoral votes are. Is there any way of cracking that nut with what your approach is?
Again, since we train police officers individually, every interaction with a police officer can go good or bad, can go constitutional or run off the rails. And so, as we teach police officers their duty, oftentimes police officers will de escalate and stand down and reduce the conflicts. Another example is that there was a person in the airport and they wanted to do all kind of things in the airport, and the citizen said no. And the airport said yes, and somebody got a sheriff's deputy involved, and the sheriff's deputy defended the citizen and shut down the airport personnel and said, no, you're not doing that here. They've got their rights, and it had a little bit to do with the TSA and everything else, but there's all kinds of ways to make a difference. Remember, every one of us who interact with one another can be kind and peaceful and appropriate, or we can be difficult, so we're looking for every interaction to go well. And even in the toughest of situations, even in urban areas, you may not get the whole police department to change on a dime, but you can get cops to realize that individuals matter, that rights matter, that their oath of office matters. And it's a police officer by police officer, a citizen by citizen training and discussion. The more the citizens show respect and back their, even their police chief or their deputies or their police officers, or the more that we engender trust and working together, the better off we are. Is it harder in those urban areas? Absolutely. But can it be done person by person? One becomes two, then becomes the few, then becomes the many. That's how our training works. And so any interaction can be changed. The outcome can be changed by training, by how will you present this? How will you act as a citizen? What will you do to support peace and prosperity in the greatest country on the face of the earth? That's really the discussion in the end of the day. But yes, in big cities, it's very difficult.
So let's say I'm hearing what you're saying right now, and I'm like, he's onto something. It's a good idea. I want to get a hold of this information. Uh, how does one look into the CSPOA?
If you go to the CSPOA.org, there's a video on the front page from Richard Mack where you can see who our president and our founder is, the man that beat Bill Clinton to the Supreme Court. There's all kinds of training materials on our website and guidance and videos and things like that. There's places where you can sign up for our newsletter and that you can join and become a member. And again, the clearinghouse of information. There's a tab where there's a bunch of documents that are used to help you vet your sheriffs and learn about us. You can watch us on TV. You can listen to us on the radio. There's a lot of ways to interact with us, and hopefully you become a member and learn. And then you'll take the information that you gain from that education and you'll use that to educate your public officials, those who you've elected or those who are appointed from those who you elected, and you can influence them for good as well.
You're listening to the National Operations Director for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, Sam Bushman. Sam, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much. CSPOA.org. We're here to serve.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Welcome to the SA segment. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Sam, talking about the constitutionality and our police force. Very insightful conversation that we had together. I want to go more into the idea of policing, touch on a couple things. First, I want to talk about the culture of a police force and how important it is to have a good culture within that police force. Like any organization of human beings that work together for a period of time, especially under one of great stress, you form certain relationships and mindsets amongst yourself that may differ from others who are outside that organization. And a police force is no different.
It's important, though, that the mindsets that are developed have certain characteristics in order to be effective in what is done. What I'm saying is nothing new. This isn't me like having a major revelation that will save the planet or anything like that. This is something I've seen firsthand, personally, in my own experiences. Many police officers I've talked with and shared stories with, they basically collaborate what I'm talking about. You have to have respect in what you do, and respect does breed a good efficiency. And what I mean by this is there's this mentality that maybe some officers or maybe even entire police forces might have of there's a new sheriff in town, we're going to crack down this, we're going to be hard-nosed on everything and just start crushing everybody around us. And of course, I can understand the sentiment behind it because, you get tired of watching maybe certain people get away with certain crimes. You get fed up that the justice system seems at times to be crazy with wanting to punish innocent people but not guilty people. And I believe there is an element to that. So in some, it can breed this sense of animosity of, you know what, we need to crack down and get hard and we're going to be very belligerent in carrying out our duties. And again, I can definitely sympathize with the sentiment. However, it's counterproductive in so many ways. When you have somebody that's hard-nosed come up to you in your life, whether you're innocent or guilty, you immediately resist them. You're going to have that trouble. Therefore, it's counterproductive. It doesn't breed any sense of efficiency. And besides, you don't want to reinforce the negative paradigms that already exist about the police force. If you show up and you act exactly like they say you're going to act, you've immediately reinforced that to where now you have definitely become an enemy. You are somebody that they are not going to work with because you've just reinforced the negative paradigm. And therefore, respect and working close with people is very important. And I notice with many of the officers, and I still interact with quite a few in my line of work, and a lot of them like to stay away from people, not interact, and they have this us versus them mentality in the mindset. And I can definitely understand how they may get to that point. But the thing is, though, is when you isolate yourself from the people that you're policing, you're creating an us and them scenario. Us versus them. So it's not serving, it's fighting them. So you eliminate yourself from access to a lot of good information. And that's important in that line of work. Information from the street of what's going on and people talking to you and they share things with you. Look, even criminals, I know this might be hard to understand, even criminals will tell on other criminals to the police officers if there's a respect element there, because they have their own little fightings and enemies and competitions going on that they'll gladly rat out someone they don't like in their little criminal world and let the police do the heavy lifting for them. So, I mean, establishing a rapport with the population is very necessary in this line of work. But by no means is this a justification to go after the police and to justify the belligerence that has been displayed towards police officers, defended and even encouraged by our big media and members of government who still sit in their positions of power, by the way. This does not allow that sort of approach to things. Those are criminal activities as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely criminal how they've gotten away with that. They want to call for the defunding of police. Now, the intellectual, highbrow, nice-looking version of it is we take some of the funding towards the police, which, somehow it's the police fault that crime exists, sort of, I guess, right? So you take money from that a little bit, have them do minor functions, like not arrest criminals now, and you divert that funding towards counseling and different workshops and, social work. And then that's supposed to fix people to where they don't commit crimes anymore. It's faulty on so many levels. I mean, I've seen people with good upbringings who've had every advantage in life turn to crime, and it's because they did it, not because they were forced into the scenario. Yet I've watched people who have come from very rough backgrounds who have lived very honest lives and productive lives because they chose to. Blaming the environment or blaming your parents is getting really old as far as I'm concerned. You've either done right or you've done wrong, and you should answer for it. Where this has been jumped into, as Sam has alluded to, there's been great problems. And, you kind of want the police around, right? And it's such a joke, this idea. It really is such a joke. And I'm of the mind of Sam as well. Let the elites lead by example. Get rid of your bodyguards and stand down your police force and then tell me how you like it. I mean, the only reason the biggest proponents are those who have their own protection. So they want to deny protection to everybody else because, hey, it doesn't matter. They have their own. It don't affect them. And then they get to look like they're high on the moral high ground, yet there they are sitting soft and easy with their own personal protection. Some of this, by the way, paid for by you. Perhaps the Democrats would be happy to downscale the Capitol Police, which guards D.C. Maybe they'd be happy in tearing down the walls and barriers they had put up. Perhaps they didn't need 20,000 National Guard troops defending them at the Capitol. I mean, it's pretty hard sell to me to demand that everyone else give up their protective agencies and downscale them and defund them when you're willing to mobilize an entire army to defend you. That's pretty sorry, in my opinion. If anything, police departments need better funding. And I say this because, again, interacting with so many law enforcement as I have, what tends to happen is we get our police officers on the cheap. We throw them through shake and bake training, and we launch them into scenarios that, honestly, they're not really prepared for. And they're in atmospheres where they're not going to be defended if they mess up. They're in positions where they're an easy write-off, to protect somebody's, political clout or somebody else's, administrative job. They'll easily, take the hit at the police officer who was just trying to do their duty, given very basic skills, very little training, thrown into a scenario that no one wants to be in, and they're expected to bring forth these great results. I mean, that's poor investment. It's absolutely poor investment. If anything, our police officers need better training. They need a lot more gaining of experience before they're just unleashed. But you know what that requires? Cost. It requires paying for it. It requires, better standards. Look, around me, a lot of our officers are out of shape. You look at them and it doesn't inspire any respect in you whatsoever because they're just either very tiny or they have this personality of they're always in fear, and it doesn't do well for that paradigm of earning respect that I'm talking about. We have the wrong people, and the reason is because we're grabbing whoever we can get. I mean, after 2020, I imagine there's not many people who suddenly decided to join the police force because they had been so demonized for an entire year by a reckless big media campaign. It drove up their ratings, but also drove down recruitment for police agencies. I mean, my own son was thinking of becoming a police officer at one point. But when he watched all happen in 2020, he decided, no, I'll do the military. He wants to serve his country. He loves his country. He wants to serve something bigger than himself. But he basically watched by an orchestrated attempt to derail police officers in this country, and you watch them people get away with it and how horrible they were treated and disrespected. Now, who wants to walk into that? No one wants to walk into that. Our police officers should be respected just as much as you want them to respect you. See, respect is always a two-way street. You can't come out and keep disrespecting people and then demand that they suddenly respect you. It goes both directions. And this is absolutely ridiculous. When you see officers being ambushed and you see that rioters have purposely orchestrated these events to hurt police officers, and then you come around with your smug look and say, oh, it was mostly peaceful, you're part of the problem of the police force. You are. This is absolutely ridiculous. You can't defend that any more than you can defend an officer who abuses their power. The point is, it's abuse of power. Big media abuses its influence just as much as some officers abuse their influence. And both have to stop. Our police must be respected. They must be better trained. We need to seek and keep better recruits. We need to protect them and honor them. And at the same time, we need to prepare them to earn the respect of the people that they are working with in order to have those ties to where they can be more effective. And that doesn't start with defunding the police.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.